Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving into something pretty provocative, this idea of uh, capitalist communism or social fundamentalism,
Mm,
terms used by Sergei Kontsavoy.
right, and it sounds like a contradiction, maybe, but Consovoy argues it's not some far-off utopia we need to invent.
Exactly. He's saying, look, the desire for a better, maybe more ideal world, that's ancient history. People have always strived for that.
But his core argument, and this is where it gets really interesting, is that some developed societies have already achieved a kind of communism in practice.
And the examples he throws out are maybe surprising. Places like, Scandinavia, but also Switzerland. He sees them as actually living this capitalist communism.
So what does he mean by that? Well, he zeroes in on one key thing: guaranteed unemployment benefits.
Ah, okay. So the idea is if society guarantees you can survive even without a job, that's a fundamental pillar, kind of like the communist ideal of from each according to his ability to each according to his need, but, well, within capitalism.
Precisely. It's that baseline security. Now, Consovoy acknowledges this isn't always viewed positively, right?
Ooh, definitely.
Hmm.
The whole idea of people getting benefits without working,
hmm
it pushes buttons. He says that's largely psychological, though.
Yeah, a sort of societal anxiety. And we saw this play out, didn't we, with the Swiss vote on universal basic income? They voted against it.
Right. That really highlights the debate, doesn't it? This question of whether people would still contribute, still find purpose if they didn't absolutely have to work for money.
And Consovoy apparently agrees with Alexei Arestovich on this point, that maybe the majority view of human nature is quite pessimistic.
Believing people are inherently lazy,
Mm-hmm.
that without the stick of necessity, they'll just stop.
Kind of, yeah. That seems to be the underlying fear. But then Consovoy adds his own experience.
Oh, what was that?
Well, he apparently found himself unemployed at one point. And he admits, the initial appeal of leisure, just relaxing, it was there.
Sure, I think anyone can relate to that initial feeling.
But he says it faded pretty quickly. He actually started wanting to do something meaningful, something beyond just chilling out.
Which feeds directly back into his main thesis, doesn't it?
Exactly. His central point is these developed economies have the structure, the potential framework for a system where people can live, maybe even live well, without traditional jobs.
The economic capacity is there.
It's there. But, and this is crucial, it requires a really well-organized society. He uses this Russian word, histiki, which means something like properly set up or attuned.
Attuned, I like that. It's not just logistics. It's about the societal vibe, almost.
I think so, yeah. It implies more than just efficiency. It's about values, shared purpose. And this is where he introduces his idea of a club system.
Okay, club system. What does that involve?
It seems to be about creating opportunities for people, maybe those on benefits, maybe others too, to engage in socially useful work. Things that need doing, but aren't necessarily traditional paid jobs.
So it's not just about receiving support. It's about contributing in different ways.
Absolutely. He's not advocating for just sitting back. He sees loads of valuable tasks people could do. Society just needs to create those avenues, those options.
And importantly, he's not anti-business either, right? If you start a company, you're successful.
Oh, completely. He thinks people who create value in business should absolutely thrive, make good money. That's the capitalist part of his capitalist communism.
It's about allowing both paths to exist and be valued.
Yeah. And when it comes to things like wealth distribution, he's quite pragmatic. He suggests we just look closely at what countries like Sweden and Switzerland are already doing. Learn from them. Don't reinvent the wheel entirely.
Which sounds very sensible. It reminds me of that principle he mentions, something from his father via the economist Pascover.
Ah, yes. Ethics precedes economics. That's a powerful one.
What does that mean in this context?
Basically that the underlying values, the ethos of a society, how people treat each other, the sense of fairness, that's what determines the economic system that works or doesn't work.
So the culture shapes the economy, not just the other way around.
Exactly. He apparently uses Germany as a positive example, suggesting their societal ethos supports their economic structure, and contrasts it maybe with challenges elsewhere, like Ukraine, suggesting the core issues are ethical or societal, not, say, linguistic or purely political.
So Consovoy's view is that this potential exists now globally. It's not science fiction.
Correct. It's about recognizing it, and then, there's that word again, adjusting society, tuning it correctly.
Tuning it so people understand, okay, striving for business success is fine, great even, but not going that route, needing support, that's also okay. And there are ways to be involved, to contribute meaningfully outside of a 9 to 5,
But this leads to a major hurdle, he points out:
which is,
our education systems. He argues they are fundamentally not preparing people for a life that might involve less traditional work, more freedom, maybe more leisure.
because schools are all about getting you ready for a job. Right.
Pretty much. The assumption baked into education, he thinks, is that work is where you find purpose, social interaction, structure, partly because maybe people haven't developed other skills or interests to fill that space.
What kind of skills does he think are missing?
He specifically mentions things like artistic skills, drawing, music, dance, things that can provide deep fulfillment completely outside of employment.
Things often treated as extras in school, if they're there at all.
Right. And he also apparently regrets the lack of, proper physical education and even what he calls psychophysical practices, ways to manage your mental and physical state.
So if you don't have these other outlets, these other ways to find meaning or structure your time,
Then you almost need the structure of a job, even if it's not fulfilling. Because what else would you do? How would you connect with people? How would you feel useful? It becomes a sort of default necessity.
and this brings us back to the closed systems idea again.
Exactly. He uses the Hogwarts houses or clubs from Harry Potter as a relatable, if fictional, example at the school level, but he envisions it much broader.
Like community groups, interest-based circles.
Yes, he even mentions the positive history of Yusho. Those clubs or circles common in the Soviet era focused on hobbies, skills, learning.
So these clubs aren't just for fun. They're potential avenues for engagement, contribution, maybe even learning skills that are socially valuable.
That seems to be the idea. They're part of that attuned society. And he has this really interesting definition of a good school, which maybe applies to society too.
You want?
He says a good school is a place you're eager to go to, but also happy to leave from, because you've been doing engaging things like research, creative projects, things that draw you in.
That makes sense. It's about intrinsic motivation, not just obligation.
And underlying all this is his more philosophical point about human nature being made in the image of a creator.
Implying that a fulfilling life at all stages, childhood, adulthood, old age, is inherently important, not just a means to an economic end.
That seems to be the implication, that facilitating that kind of fulfillment should be a societal goal.
So it leaves us with a pretty big question to chew on, doesn't it?
Definitely. If we really took seriously this potential convoy outlines the potential for people to thrive beyond just traditional work, how would we need to change things?
Yeah, how would our societies and especially our schools need to evolve to actually support that kind of life? Something to think about.